before we start, I just want to say something. Thank you all for taking the time to come and speak with us. You've all individually done such great things for climate justice, whether it be through music or through policy. And I just want to say, as the climate justice reporter, we're really happy you're here. So Anisha is going to do the intro.
Okay, sorry for the delay, everyone. It's nice to meet you. Good afternoon. Welcome and thank you for joining Word in Black for Can Hip Hop Save Our Climate? In other words, can the dope MCs of yesterday and today move the crowd to take action in their personal lives and demand change from our elected officials and policymakers? My name is Anissa Durham, and I'm the health data reporter here at Word in Black. If you're just learning about us, welcome to the Word in Black family. Word in Black is a collaborative newsroom founded by 10 leading Black publishers in direct response to the murder of George Floyd. Our collaborative includes historic contributors to the Black press coast to coast, from the Sacramento Observer in Cali to the 130-year-old Baltimore Afro. We have a bold vision to be the most trusted news and information sources for, about, and by Black folks. If you don't already know, follow us here on socials, subscribe to our newsletter, and visit us on the web at wordinblack.com. Just to give you an overview of our reporting, it's focused on amplifying solutions that individuals, organizations, and communities working for racial equity and justice. Hip Hop Caucus is one of those organizations. They're dedicated to the pursuit of justice, everything from voting rights to climate justice, all through the lens of music. So asking if hip hop can help save the climate is a timely topic, since it is Earth Month and Earth Day, and this year is the 50th anniversary of hip hop. So this webinar was inspired by reporting for Earth Day Every Day, our new series, which looks at how climate change deeply affects Black folks and the solutions our community is coming up with. So if you guys have questions, if you're participants and you just joined through our Zoom, there's a Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. If you're tuning in on Facebook, we'll do our best to monitor the chat to see if there's questions there as well. We are recording the conversation and we'll be posting it on our YouTube channel as well as wordinblack.com, so you can send it to your folks or rewatch it later.
Thank you, Anissa, for that great intro. I just want to give a little bit of a background on climate justice for those of you who don't know, who are just tuning in. My name is Myra Craven. I'm the climate justice reporter, and climate justice really is about recognizing how Black folk are disproportionately affected by the effects of climate change. I believe we all have an obligation as Black folk to care about other Black folk, and so climate justice is our fight. And before I get into questions, I just wanted to say that air pollution, petrochemical plants, there are so many things that affect Black people. And that's why we need to fight for climate justice, because what affects one of us affects all of us. So my first question is for Russell. We've seen how hip hop has been used in the fight for civil rights, but hip hop is not really known for being associated with the environmental movement or efforts to stop climate change. Why don't we associate the two?
Well, I don't know if we associate the two. And first off, I want to just give a little brief introduction about the Hip Hop Caucus. I mean, we work at the intersection of not just environmental justice, but economic justice, civil and human rights, and democracy and voting. And all of those things are intertwined and focus on the rights, particularly of Black and Indigenous people, Black, Brown, and Indigenous peoples. And so when we think of environmental justice, we need to think of more broadly than just, maybe the crunchy idea of conservation, or thinking about, this brand in plastic versus paper straws. We're talking about things like toxic waste, urban heat islands, buildings like the Brick City being burning, riots in the streets, environmental defenders being murdered. And in some of those instances, hip hop does talk about and address those things. They just may not necessarily associate it with environmental justice. We just associate it with justice in general, particularly for Black and Brown communities. So I think part of our work is making the connection so that people realize, both for, what we consider the more liberal elites and like big green organizations, and also for like the at-home grassroots organizers that focus on civil rights and civil rights issues, deaths in custody, all of the things that seem like more traditional hip hop focused civil issues, and understanding that those things are both connected. Like, we are still concerned about issues around the air we breathe and the water we have to drink. I mean, Outkast was talking about this in the 90s, Mos Def was talking about this in the 90s. So these are things that hip hop has addressed, but it has not always risen to the forefront of the movement in ways that, maybe gun violence and other things that we see on TV and normally associated with Black people are usually seen as issues that we are supposed to be focused on.
Thank you for that, Russell. My next question is for Jarrell. As the digital director of Hip Hop Caucus, how has it been for you to boost awareness about the intersections between hip hop and climate?
Thank you for that question. I would say it's been a good opportunity for folks who aren't yet dialed into the climate movement to think about what their role is with how we all fight the climate crisis. And what I mean by that is we all exist and are a part of intersecting communities, whether that be the community with hip hop, and then breaking down the subgroups of that, our race, our gender, any identity that we subscribe to. We then take that and use or leverage, I should say, all of those identities to come together to talk about how you can be you can contribute to this fight for climate justice. One of those ways is through music and through art. And the way that we highlight that from a digital lens is giving people more access to the mic. We all say that when you show up, you have, your 15 seconds of fame and whatnot. What we're trying to do is expand the duration, right? But we're also trying to expand the platform as well. And so we think of Twitter Spaces, we think of Clubhouse conversations, you think of Instagram Lives. What we do is find that way of how we traditionally convene in our neighborhoods. Where do we find that space in the virtual world? And that is where our team comes in and tries to create that space for particularly folks who are looking to get involved with the climate movement, but just don't know what the first step is.
Thank you for that. I'm gonna do a follow-up question, but for Dawn, actually, based off what you just said. One of our digital editors just wrote a piece on eco-friendly fashion. And with social media putting pressure on hip hop artists and musicians in general to never wear the same outfit, to always look perfect. Do you think artists are shifting to sustainable fashion at all? Is Drake shopping at the thrift shop, or what do you think it's going to take to get there?
I think that's a great question. I think it's ever evolving, and I think it's going to be more than just a Drake. I think it's going to start at the grassroots level. But what I think is more important is that we tend to look at the larger artist as the example, but because of social media, because of digital, because of the way in which the climate has changed in our generation X and millennial culture, you have access to multiple artists now. The big artists are not the gatekeepers of what change will happen, right? So now you have sustainable designers, you have younger independent artists who have their own cult followings speaking out about the importance of sustainable fashion. And so you have a movement happening that doesn't require Drake, that doesn't require a larger artist, right, to be the example. People themselves are becoming the example. And because of the viral sensations, because of the TikToks, because of the Instagram, because of Snapchat, to me, the movement is spreading faster, and it's not waiting for the so-called celebrity or so-called million follower person to engage into the sustainable movement. They're choosing to have that talk now and doing that movement. So if anything, the Drakes are following the trend of what the culture is setting on Black Twitter, or what the culture is setting, on the climate of digital. They're actually following these grassroots and these cult hubs, these collectives that are speaking out about the importance of what it takes. So the artist has changed, the artivist has changed, and the message has evolved where we're not waiting for an influencer or someone else to make that choice. You're seeing a culture dictating that, our culture dictating it ourselves, and other people, larger people, following suit.
And Dawn, I'm wondering if you think that Gen Z, activism on social media and seeing celebrity involvement is kind of inspiring Gen Zs to get more interested in climate justice?
I think Gen Z is special. And I think you're like, yes, they are, to me, they are the movers. Like millennials, I think we started something, but I think we were still following the trend, trying to figure it out. But I think Generation Z understands the power of their word. They're unafraid and fearless in understanding that whatever this earth is, that they're getting the leftovers. Right, they're realizing you guys have messed this up and now you're giving it to us. And if we don't speak out, this is what we have left. And I think that fearlessness and that unapologetic activism, artivism, right, that they're choosing to have is what's causing this movement to happen. And honestly, as an artist myself, I'm more inspired to write it in the lyrics, to put it in the art, to put it in the animation, to put it in, because I'm inspired by what Generation Z is. They're demanding. They're demanding us to pay attention. And so you see it in waves, I think, not only in social media, but in storytelling, which is why you have more films acknowledging it, more series. We were just doing something yesterday with storytelling and writers writing in the climate justice within their series. Insecure, Abbott Elementary, they're writing the stories within their own series because people like Generation Z, these young writers, these people coming in, demand that the conversation be had.
Thank you for that. And back to Russell, you're the policy director for climate and environment at Hip Hop Caucus. What do you spend most of your time doing? And what do you think are some pressing issues for Black folk right now?
Thank you for the question, Maya. I spend a lot of my time doing a lot, actually. For our organization, like we're actually having our policy and legislative agenda unveiling tomorrow evening on the Hill, on Capitol Hill. And so as part of that, it's going to lay out all of the different work that we focus on and that are working between mobilizing the grassroots on the ground through mobile, through digital, through strategies like that, and to also engaging members on the Hill, senators, representatives on issues of climate and environmental justice. We have a platform that focuses a lot on uplifting communities in the Gulf South and raising awareness around the issues of extraction and sacrifice zones being utilized as a way to expand both dirty energy and fossil fuels, particularly LNG, and the exports that are happening across the world that are tied into a geopolitical conflict halfway across the world in Europe and competition with countries in Asia. And we're also talking about the manufacture of petrochemicals that continue to create adverse impacts in health, chronic respiratory diseases, asthma, and increased cancer rates for Black people in the Gulf South, but also in the Ohio River Valley, in Appalachia, happening to our brown brothers and sisters in California, where you see increases there. And so we focus on amplifying those fights, finding frontline leaders, bringing awareness through our own platforms and getting attention to these issues and standing in solidarity with them, opposing issues such as pipelines and power plants, strengthening power plant rules at places like EPA, and managing relationships with officials such as Administrator Michael Regan, a brother from North Carolina, and his staff, working with them and identifying those allies and potential allies in the halls of power who can help our communities moving forward. So that's some of the work that we do. We've also had an increased focus since I came on board about, looking at the global diaspora, the common issues that are happening to communities such as those in the Gulf South, and what's happening across the world in places like Central Africa, in Asian Pacific islands that are threatened by global sea rise, and looking at what we can do to bridge the gap between those communities. And so showing up at conferences such as, at UN spaces, whether it's COP or the Water Sustainability Conference, we're talking about things like the Global Plastic Treaty. These are things that we like to continue to bring awareness about. Even issues such as, the Silicon Valley Bank and how its collapse ended up impacting climate tech companies, and is another red flag for folks who are concerned about issues where our money is being funneled into these big banks that continue supporting issues and supporting industries that are actually polluting our world. like the biggest four banks, the biggest four contributors to fossil fuels globally are four US owned banks. And these are the same banks that, for a long time, supported industries that were focused on, redlining, housing discrimination, keeping our money outside of the communities. And so we need to raise awareness and fight those. And so next week we'll be in solidarity with groups at some of their annual general meetings. We're rallying outside trying to call attention to that. So that's just some of the things that we're busy doing here at the Hip Hop Caucus.
And I saw we have someone join us. Do you prefer Brandy or B?
Brandy, B, either one works.
Okay, well, I'm so glad you joined us because I have a couple of questions saved for you, even though I was told you weren't coming. So I'm happy you're here. I wanted to know if there's anything going on for the 50th anniversary of hip hop. Is Hip Hop Caucus doing anything?
So we do. We have we're kind of spacing all of our things out over the year. So they're digital activations. We have an annual event in October during CBC weekend. So we're planning something for that. We have some activations and plans with a couple of libraries, including the National Library. So stay tuned.
Thank you for that. And do you want to tell me about a specific initiative you're working on, maybe?
So I'll talk a little bit about the filtered, not bottled campaign, and what that is it's addressing clean water access for residents, Black and brown communities across the country. And we're partnering with the Plastics Pollution Coalition on this work. And what we are hoping to do is, as the infrastructure, as cities and states start to tap into the $15 billion that's available for replacing lead pipelines through the infrastructure bill, is to make sure that as they wait for the replacement of those pipes, they are getting filters, and that the filters are being distributed to the people who need them most, which usually are people in Black and brown communities, but also that as these pipes are being replaced, they're not being replaced with PVC plastic or CPVC plastic pipes. Because what we have found out, there's a report that came out yesterday from Beyond Plastics, and it talks about the dangers of plastics and plastic pollution, and how that shows up in clean water access. So we're replacing lead pipes, which are toxic, with plastic pipes, which have shown to be toxic as well. So to Russell's point, vinyl chloride is one of the main ingredients in making those plastic pipes. And we saw what happened in East Palestine, and we know about the toxicity of vinyl chloride. So the same thing exists in our homes with these plastic pipes. So we still continue to need these filters even after the pipe replacement. And for a lot of new construction that is being built, we're using plastic pipes. We want to change the industry standard to a non-plastic alternative like stainless steel or copper pipes. And as a mental health coach and holistic health coach as well, understanding the negative impacts of plastic on our bodies, the microplastics, and what they can do for our mental health, anxiety, depression, ADHD, autism, as well as the impacts. So on our physical health, diabetes, hypertension, a lot of the hormone related cancers. So we want to make sure that we're cleaning our pipes, making sure that they're being replaced with, cleaning the water and making sure they're not being replaced with plastic. So lead pipes should not be replaced with plastic pipes, and we need filters.
I want to ask you a follow-up question. B, you mentioned the infrastructure bill. For people who aren't familiar with climate or climate justice, do you think you could give like a very short summary of what that is and what it could do for us?
So the infrastructure bill is essentially monies that the federal government has set aside for infrastructure improvements, and they've assigned different pots of money for different things. And so there's money specifically placed aside, 15 billion, as I indicated, for lead pipe replacement. So the goal is to get all the lead pipelines replaced across the United States.
Okay, great. And then Russell, I'm so sorry you have to leave. Let me ask you one more question. What do you think is the number one thing someone can do right now to help fight the climate crisis?
Well, it depends on where you stand. So everyone can do their part depending on where they're at. And so going back to the question you had just asked Brandy about, what's happening with the infrastructure bill and the Inflation Reduction Act money. Like, for example, there's this fund that people refer to as the, green bank, but it's the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. This is the first time like the EPA is giving out billions of dollars, nearly $30 billion, that's supposed to be allocated 40% of it, making sure at least for benefits specifically for low income, disadvantaged Black and brown communities, without saying Black and brown, and specifically for the federal government, for us. And so that's the sort of thing that we need, is to start mobilizing people to say, like, this money needs to go to, whether it's community CDFIs, community lenders, people who understand the needs of local areas, and making sure that money is being built for their own economic justice. So whether they are, whether you're working at, your local, or volunteering at your local, garden, learning about solar plant panels and installing in microgrids there, advocating in the streets for your local government to, start to, divest from fossil fuels, advocating on social media. Like, honestly, it was a bunch of TikTokers who really pushed the Biden administration to stop, to push away and shrink their footprint on the Willow Project. I mean, they eventually passed that project anyway, but it really gave them cold feet and made them think twice about it beforehand, because they saw the power of people being organized. So I think there's a lot that people and individuals can do, especially when we empower them and give them the tools and the access to the information for it. So you don't have to be part of a big organization to say that you want to be part of and involved in this fight.
Okay, and I know you have to run, so I'm going to ask you one more question. You mentioned the Willow Project. A lot of people do not know about that, and it is serious. It's very serious. So I wanted to ask you if you could just explain in layman's terms what the Willow Project is, and what we should do to fight it.
Sure. So, I mean, that's, one of those projects where the fight may be lost right now, but there are other fights. For example, there's another Alaska LNG project that's coming up that for approval that we can fight against as well. But the issue is that the Arctic this is natural gas. They're pulling gas out of the ground. ConocoPhillips is the corporation that's been applying for these permits for years now, and they have to get approval from the government. And the problem is that as the Arctic is warming faster than the rest of the globe, if we're digging in the Arctic for oil and gas, which is a ridiculous prospect in its own self, because they have to keep the ice on the ground frozen so that they can drill for the oil there as it's thawing, because the oil is coming out the ground, heating up the world faster. So just think about that irony. But that is what's happening literally there right now. It's like they're starting to go in production. The problem is that as you do that, obviously that increases greenhouse gas emissions, which increases, the likelihood of major storms, the higher likelihood of weird weather patterns. If you're in torrential rains, if you're in California, you've seen that for the first time. If you've been on the East Coast, you've seen abnormal heat waves that have been happening more often. So that's the issues with these sorts of projects. But outside of the fighting against like any of these specific oil and gas projects that get approved, where it seems like we're just playing whack-a-mole all the time, there are also individual things like actions that people can do again. And like I said, like, there's adoptions, there's things happening in terms of electric vehicles, in terms of emissions, like, pushing for that. Like, we're working on a campaign right now to try and get emission standards improved for cleaner cars overall and clean trucks. Like, we have a video out that Jarrell and Dawn can both speak to, about our pushing for adoption of higher vehicle emissions, improved emissions for heavy duty vehicles. That's trucks. That's those major freight carriers that you see on the highway going past those corridors where obviously Black and brown people live, where you smell that air toxin that drives past. You hear that in your window every time you open your window. And that's the sort of thing that seems like an everyday pollution problem. But the cumulative effect of that actually is what's creating the largest contributions to climate change in the country. Like, over a quarter of our emissions come from the transportation sector, for example. A quarter come from the power plant sector. So fighting all of these different fights, going back to your first question about what can individuals do, those are the sorts of things that individuals can continue to fight against. And on the Willow point and on the EPA point, I believe we still have petitions open about fighting against some of those issues and industries. But I'll let them speak more to that.
Yeah, so I just wanted to jump in. For Brandy, we're talking about piping, which is really important. But everyone typically is drinking from plastic water bottles because they don't trust the water that's coming out of the faucet. So what would it look like to get something like Rolling Loud to go plastic free?
It would be amazing. And when you start to talk about that, we're actually going to be launching a pilot program with a run club here. I'm based in Charlotte, North Carolina. It's a Mad Miles running club. And you see people out there with these water bottles. And when you finish your run, they're passing out these plastic water bottles. And so we want them to go plastic free. And so we want to have the conversation at a grassroots level about that. And so we're using this as an opportunity to do that so that we can take it to festival operators and say, hey, here's an opportunity. Here's how you can do it. Logistically, here's how it works. Here's the information that needs to go out, because we do want people to stop using single-use plastic bottles. One, to the environmental impact, but also the health impact. Broccoli City is another one. So we're looking at all the different festivals and ways that we can work in plastic free as a part of this program that we're working with.
Thank you for that. Now I have questions for all of the panelists. Russell, I just want to thank you for coming. I know you have to hop off, but your answers were amazing.
Thank you guys for having me. Sorry I have to join.
Yeah. So I already asked Russell this question, but I want to hear from the other panelists. What do you think people can do right now to make a difference in the fight for climate justice?
So I'll start. I think Russell said it best. Start where you are. Get educated. We have lots of amazing tools that can educate you. We have a series that's called Big Oil's Last Lifeline that talks about the danger that plastic production does and the harm it does to communities of color in the creation. So start there. Start by just watching that, and you can go to We Shall Breathe to find, Google We Shall Breathe, and you can find that 3-part series that we did that's actually narrated by Dawn. So that's an amazing way to start. But in your everyday life, we just talked about eliminating plastic water bottles. Stop using plastic water bottles. Get you a refillable water bottle, stainless steel. And now that we've discussed even the dangers of plastic and drinking, if your home has PVC pipes, getting filters to put into your home so that you can clean up your drinking water, small things like that. Don't buy synthetic clothes, polyester blends, and a lot of the synthetic clothes are actually made from the same chemicals or have the same chemicals that plastics are made from. So just educating yourself and demanding in the way that we always do that a big industry stops using these products, and if we stop consuming them, they'll have to shift with us. So I think it's first getting educated, understanding what small things you can do, and then joining in the advocacy work that we're doing are 3 ways that I think that people can get active right now.
Okay, great. Dawn, you want to go next?
Yeah, I can go next. I can even speak from experience as a creative I went through Katrina. I lost everything. I went through an actual climate disaster, and the need, like Brandy says, to research. I wanted to do more as a creative. I was an artist already in my career, and I wanted to know how to do more. And I wanted to understand what New Orleans and Louisiana was, why we lost so much. Why was I homeless in the first place? And I think that research is so important. A lot of us as people, not just creators, we're sitting in a place and we're not educated on the place that we're born in. Why is our family members dying at a faster rate? Why is our water toxic? Why are we having storms like this? Why when we do have the storm, no one cares? Like for us, it took 3 weeks for us to even get water when Katrina happened. People died because of that, right? So for me, it was the research, the education to know what they weren't telling us, right? We were just a city that everyone loved, but everyone would come and put money in, but no one would tell us why we were still a poor city with all this money and all this tourism and all this music, right? So I think for us, it's up to us to first educate, like she said, and research, and then the power of action, it can start at a grassroots level. Just wanting to partner with Hip Hop Caucus and saying, okay, this is an organization that is believing in the similar things that I do. How can I make a difference? Like, we're in a climate right now where more than ever, we have a lot of Black-owned companies and a lot of entrepreneurs wanting to make change. So it's beautiful to go to research and see that there are sustainable businesses, Black-owned, that are affordable, that we can totally latch on to, totally support, to get out of the norm of what's happening right now, to help save our situation. So even if it's you deciding, today I'm going to decide to wear sustainable clothing only. Today I'm going to decide to go to Black and green banking. I'm going to do my due diligence, just like you go decide to get your car get maintenance. You have to care about your own life, your own motions, and what you choose to do. So like, I woke up one day and said, I want only Black healthcare providers. I had to do the due diligence to do that, right? We have to do that as our own people, as a culture, to say, we're going to take the time, just as much as we take time in our funds to go out and change our car, or to go get this new outfit for this thing we have to do, or the jobs that we have, right? The home that we have to put maintenance on. We have to decide in our own lives, how are we going to make these changes to be able to have a better earth? And I think that once we do that research, we can realize we can do it on that level as a creative, as an artist, which is whom I work with at Hip Hop Caucus, working mostly with artists. I think we have a powerful tool right now to be able to tell the stories to help people get to that research. And I think as creators, whether you're a writer, a singer, an artist, a muralist, an animator, like we have, like Russell spoke about, we have an animator who had no clue about petrochemicals, no clue about environmental crisis, no clue about climate justice. We brought brought the black animator in, and educated them while they were making the animation, and was blown away to the point where now the choices have changed for this animator. This young animator now wants to make more explainer videos speaking about petrochemicals, speaking about heavy duty trucking, all because we hired a Black animator to do work and tell the story of what it means about what's happening in our states. I think that's powerful. And the more we have content creators, more artists willing to do that due diligence and know that they have power within their art to speak about it, whether it's a small snippet in a series, whether it's a wall muraled with plant-based paint, or collaborating with a sustainable company for your tour, so that all your merch is sustainable t-shirts. Like, there are ways, or going deeper, like water bottles being taken away from the Broccoli City or something in the water, or Afro Tech or Afro Punk, these Black festivals where we decide to make choices, and doing that kind of due diligence on a creative level, I think could be powerful. And I don't think artists and creatives know the power they have with that. And I think once they realize that if they put that in their everyday art and their everyday choice, it will become something that many will follow.
Okay, and you mentioned, well, I asked you about eco-friendly fashion, but how do you tell people not to buy polyester clothes when the Shade Room has a Fashion Nova outfit featured every day?
And I think the Shade Room in itself is a conversation that needs to be had on who's running it and why. And I think that's for our community, we have to have a bigger discussion on that. But I think the way in which we, I think, counter that is by us having more support from our Black independent journalists and our Black media, and our organizations like Hip Hop Caucus, putting in the time to invest in and highlight sustainable businesses. And I think once we do that, it makes it popular. For me personally, it has been a goal of mine, to every artist that I've worked with, put that information into their pockets. Like, every time we have a discussion, or every time I do my tours or talk to other artists, giving them a list of sustainable companies that they could invest in. So for every Shade Room, there are 4 to 5 other incredible blogs that we can highlight, that are highlighting it, that are talking about it. Teen Vogue does a really good job of working with that, and showing people, look, Essence does a good job of saying, here's are the 10, 25 are Black sustainable businesses you should be in the know with. So though the shade room was mentioned, we have to remember as a culture, there is, for whatever bad seed we do have that doesn't show that, there are organizations like Hip Hop Caucus, like Essence, like Revolt, these small Black owned, businesses that are highlighting, journalists that are highlighting these sustainable companies. And I also think as creatives, especially when we have these followers and we have these platforms, it is imperative that we do due diligence to show and highlight them. And to me, that's what Hip Hop Caucus was for me, is to be a part of an organization that creates platforms. That word, platform and opportunity, is imperative for us to show that these sustainable businesses do exist. And I think once we continue to do that at a grassroots level, it's inevitable that others will follow. And you're starting to see it with Black Twitter. And I say Black Twitter because Black Twitter has dictated severe sponsor. They have dictated a lot of marketing and advertising in companies. And I think if that happens, the shift happens, just like Russell spoke about TikTok and with the Willow Project. I think the more and more we pay attention to those incredible moments and less about the trend will become sustainability. The trend will become the new way of going out into the world. When you have artists like Jaden Smith, who is creating a filtered water and what he's done for Flint, and you have artists like the Fowls and artists like Killer Mike talking about banking and Black. When you have artists constantly stating this, I think you'll see that change.
Can I also respond to that? Because I don't know how many have watched Next in Fashion, but the guy who won Next in Fashion, Nigel Foster, I can't remember Nigel's last name, but he's building a whole new culture around sustainability and mainstream hip hop. He's designing for artists like 2 Chainz. He's designing furniture. He's designing clothes. So he's actually putting this out into the atmosphere, and it's becoming a big thing. And he's amazing. His work is amazing, and it's cultural and it's hip hop. And so I think to Don's point, for every person that we have celebrating, something else, which is clearly a business transaction for them, right? And if we went to them and we had an opportunity to share more about what we were doing and try to find a partnership, we could also do the same thing. I think there's that education again, how we educate, because I'm sure the shade room is not clear. Most people don't understand Nigel Xavier, yes. And most people don't understand that they're actually contributing to the plastics problem when they buy fashion. So all of that, I think, all of that goes into how we actually counter what's happening.
Thank you for that. I'm so sorry, Jarrell. I asked so many follow-up questions. I wanted to know what you think about what is necessary or can be done to join the fight for climate justice.
I just echo everything that Don and Brandy have so eloquently stated before. And this is hip hop. We had Wu-Tang Clan telling us that cash rules everything around me in the 90s. I think a lot of folks now are realizing that climate rules everything around me too. And when we have 3 folks, as y'all just mentioned, Jaden Smith, Nigel Xavier, and others, so beautifully showing us what the blueprint looks like for how we do this in our everyday life. You really can't help but sign on to where this movement is going, because we know what the consequences are for inaction. And so I would say, with that awareness piece and just becoming aware of what's around you and why it affects you, that would be the first step, is that part that Don mentioned about researching more, part that Brandy mentioned about getting involved and doing what we can to make the system change, both from an individual perspective in terms of what we can do as a consumer, but also how we can advocate locally and federally to make sure that there are regulations in place that move the industry to compliance on how we can fight the climate crisis.
Yeah.
And honestly, guys, like seriously, it's inevitable, because if you look around, we've had more Black sustainable businesses that have come up in the last 5 years. It's like seriously, since 10 years ago to now has been so beautiful to watch. And I think that having artists, even having the Janae Aikos, the SZAs, all these celebrities are talking about, they're not afraid. They're speaking about political issues. You remember we couldn't buy a vowel for our artists to talk about political justice because they felt it would mess up their image. And now you have artists speaking out, from the Cardi B's to Megan, from economic justice to, I mean, they're whether right or wrong, the voices are becoming louder. And I think because of that, though it isn't as loud as we would want it to be, we have seen a definite shift in the way in which the artist or even the creative or people that are in the limelight are choosing to talk about these matters. It is becoming a necessity for people to talk about it and do something about it.
Yeah, thank you for all of the comments and the discussion on that. I wanted to move on into a community discussion. We're going to open up the floor for the attendees to ask any questions. I'll start with one that we already have prepared. It says, there's the classic element of hip hop like emceeing, breakdancing, DJing, graffiti writing, and some folks add knowledge of self as a fit. Are there any ideas to have environmental consciousness as a formal element?
I can speak and say that I don't think that that's something that has come up in our discussions, but I love that idea. And I think that it would be amazing for us, as we think about the fifth as knowledge of self, the many different ways across hip hop and across our experience that we kind of think about what that means for us and how it ties into climate. Because again, when you traditionally think of climate, you're not thinking about fashion. You're not thinking about the fact that the water that I'm drinking out of my faucet, even with a filter on it, is coming through pipes that are being produced in communities of people who look like me and could be killing us, and that I'm contributing to industry in that way. So I think there's a lot that we could do to kind of to bring that into focus. So I appreciate the question.
And this could be for any panelist, what do you all feel is the biggest myth surrounding climate change?
It's too big to fight.
That it won't affect them because it's not in their own environment, right? It's just over there. It's not in here. It's not touching them, that it's not something that they need to be involved in.
B, you want to say something on that?
I think they've covered it, but yeah, I think it's too big to fight. And honestly, I think a lot of people, especially Black and brown people, don't see it as their fight. Still, right? Even though we are the most impacted, again, they aren't understanding the intersectionality of it. So I think that's what I was trying to get at before, just how intersectional this issue is, and it touches almost every aspect of everything else that we're working on. And so I think, when we bring up the climate conversation, they're like, okay, but that's tree hugger stuff. Like they're still thinking about it from the 1970s Woodstock view and not really from the earth emergency that it is today.
Got it. And how would you say communities can create accountability around the effects of climate change? Do you want to start, Jay? Jarrell? Sorry, I just called you Jay.
No worries. Can you repeat the question? I'm sorry.
Yeah. So basically, how do we create accountability? Say if there's a random person on here who said, you know what, I'm in this small community, nobody cares about the environmental crisis. How do I create accountability in my community?
I would say one of the ways to create accountability is by naming who all is responsible for this in the first place, and then creating a way to hold them accountable. A lot of issues that you see today, even when I was growing up, I grew up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I remember having to have class in school be canceled because the air was too thick for us to go to school. The air quality was too horrible. So they had to just cancel school completely that day. And we contributed that at the time to just all of the steel mills and whatnot that used to be in Pittsburgh, without even linking it to a climate issue. No one talked about it in that way. And we didn't have the language to call it environmental racism at the time. We just knew that there were factories that were a block away. And so, of course, in that scenario, you don't know, the person you're holding accountable is, the workers at the steel mill down the street, when you should be holding your city council accountable. And so finding a way to, or the corporations that come in and don't have any type of regard for the citizens that they poison while making a profit. And so how do you hold these folks accountable? First, you have to get to the root of the problem and work with community to find that root. And so you can tackle it and pull it out together.
Dawn, you look like you were going to say something.
Yeah, I also agree. Like I think we need to not only hold, so first and foremost, look to your city officials or your town officials and look to see what they are what bills are being passed that you're not aware of. When you get your voting and you see your ballots and it's things you don't understand, getting to the bottom of the bills that are written in such a way that you don't know what is being had, and you're looking at your infrastructure and figuring out what plant is being built by your home. For example, I'm from New Orleans, Louisiana, and my parents just moved into a home with next like 2 minutes from one of the largest power plants, and you can smell it. You can smell it everywhere. And so having my parents go to the town meetings and talk and ask questions, because they're lied to constantly, saying, oh, it doesn't affect your health. And then them having to go do due diligence and say, but this company, researching the company, holding the company accountable, filing suit, like getting lawyers if you have to, working with your community, getting to know your neighbors and your community around you, so that you guys can maybe invest in lawyers to look into things, so you can hold these power plants accountable or hold your city officials or your town officials accountable. But there's a bigger play here. You need to hold yourself accountable. And I think we as a community need to start looking at ourselves. It starts with us. So the choice to get rid of plastics, the choice to decide to wear sustainable, the choice to change diet, the choice to make the relationships and to do the due diligence, to sit down and say, okay, who's really passing these bills? Why are we not voting? How do we make this change? You have to put the accountability to yourself too. If things around your environment are not doing what it needs to do, first you need to acknowledge it, see it, and then do the work with your community to make that change. It doesn't have to be on a major level. It can start right within the literally your neighbors, your neighborhood, and start there. And as you progress, real change can happen.
So I'd like to add to that. I think Dawn just preached. I was like, was getting chills as she was talking. But someone asked a question around how do we have chapters and how can people get involved? Absolutely. I lead that work. And so we want people to get educated. So part of that work is educating people so that they can educate more people. So our organizing work is built on the thought that we do relational organizing, right? So part of this is educating yourself so that you can go out and be a voice and educate other people. So we educate you, and then we ask you to tell 10 more people. And then we hope that those 10 people will then become members, and then they will form their own list of people that they can then get educated and tell more people. So that's how we're hoping that people hold themselves and the system accountable. And then I wanted to point out that our name, our president and CEO, Rev Yearwood, always reminds us that our name actually means something. We hip people to the issues. So we'll hip you to what's going on. And when you hop, you move. So we're hipping you so that you can hop to action, and that we do it together. Caucus means together. So Hip Hop Caucus is really about exactly what you're talking about, the accountability piece. We're hipping you so that you can hop and move with us to make this happen.
Yeah, thank you all for those comments. It's been a really insightful discussion. We just have one more question from one of the attendees. It mentions, if there is any cultural theme that ties education and hip hop, it would have to be a call and response technique. Have any of the panelists used this deep-rooted technique in your work? I don't know if anyone has comments on that.
I mean, I know I have, but that's because as an artist, as a musician, right? even making records so people, it's almost like putting something in the atmosphere. Sometimes you'll put in a record something and people don't even know that they're singing something, right? That's reflective of the times and putting that into atmosphere. So I've done it a lot within art, within music, and then also working with other artists, muralists who will put something out. Like, again, call and response is not necessarily always verbal, right? Having someone walk and see change on a wall can then cause a reaction for someone to then reflect that back in return. I've also done work with artists who have done interactive murals where they can actually put down the manifestation of the call and response. And then, you know, verbatim too, having artists actually tell people to, this is how you do it, now receipt, now do it back. You know, like the give and take in the call and response that is hip hop. But I've been lucky enough because I work with artists to have that done in many different ways. And I guess the bottom line to that is there is no one way, right, to affect change and to get into this cause. There are many ways for you to be present in this. So there should be no excuse why our community can't win. And because we are a very artistic community, we pride ourselves in being, to me, the leaders in creativity, the leaders in innovation, the leaders in culture and soul. There is no reason why we can't go out there and do that actual call and response through our art, whether it's a sewing outfit, whether it's music, whether it's paint, whether it's design, whether it's a teacher in a classroom, whether it's community work. The way in which we do things has always been fly and added with sauce. So to me, that call and response is in who we are. It's ingrained in who we are. And so there should be no reason why we can't go out and do just that and do it in a way that can cause others to want to do it too, because what we do is always the trend.
Yeah, thank you for that. Did anyone have any last minute comments before I hand it over to Maya?
No? Okay. Well, I think Dawn's comment was a great one to end on. I want to thank all of you again for coming. I don't know if Joseph's here, but big shout out to the director of PR at Hip Hop Caucus, Joseph Pate. The last thing I want to say is that I want to thank the managing director of Word in Black, Liz. I can't pronounce her very French last name, but she really spawned the idea behind this, and has been an incredible boss and mentor. And so thank you all for coming, and please stay in touch.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.